All right, we're going to be talking about spline meshes. This is going to be to create meshes like this, where you would create some vegetation in SpeedTree or something similar, and then you would use and manipulate splines in Unreal Engine to create like these vines, or you could use it for ropes or cables or anything you want, really. I've created a couple different variants here, but we'll be creating one from scratch and then bringing it into this test level. So here are the three that I have created in SpeedTree 304, and then they've been applied to a custom Spline Mesh component here. A couple of reasons why I wanted it to be custom. You'll see there isn't a lot of stretching here. You see it looks a little bit stretched there, but that's actually from the level of detail, and that will stretch it along a particular axis. And normally if you just apply this to a mesh to a spline mesh, it will actually stretch it. So the custom spline mesh takes the extents or the bounds of the mesh into account, and using the axis that you're extruding or lofting or applying it to the spline as well, which also go over. And then we'll also just quickly show again how to procedurally place these. We're actually spawning these procedurally and placing them on static meshes as well. And then we'll do a cook and make sure that it works in the package game as well, because there are differences between the editor and the packaged game where your spline meshes won't work. I'm using Unreal Engine 421.2 and I'm using SpeedTree 8.3.1. It's a beta build. I don't know if it's going to, if this demonstration or if this tutorial will work with other versions of Unreal Engine, because we're currently in production with our next title, so we're tied down to 421. We're not going to be changing versions for the next couple of years. So whatever issues we have, we find workarounds for. All right, let's get started. I'm going to start by just jumping over to SpeedTree, and then we'll take a look at one of those vines, and then we'll create our own one. Some of them work better than others. I found the ones that are that have fewer leaves, because the leaves start to look very repetitive pretty quickly. There are ways that you could negate that by potentially making your spline longer, your vegetation mesh longer. But generally I think those draping vines don't have that many leaves anyway. They just maybe have more vines themselves, and these are pretty well optimized as well. So they go from 3,000 triangles to about 800 triangles, which is nothing really. They're going to be placed in the level using blueprints, and we can place quite a lot of them in the level without running into problems, as we're going to demonstrate as well. We're also going to be doing a package build, but let's just quickly break this down and just take a look. So the leaf meshes themselves are nothing noteworthy here. They're just added on some twigs, and the twigs themselves are pretty short little twigs. So hopefully I'll be able to recreate that. And then if you let's take a look at the tube. This is really where the magic happens. So the tube itself is, the trunk tube itself is 3 tubes that then just have some properties, like they're scaled really thinly, they're a little bit crooked. They're a little bit crooked or bent. just to make them look, and they're a little bit twisted as well, to make them look like something that you'd be able to apply to a spline to create a vine. Then, because these are going to be repeated across the spline, we also needed a way where we could control the offset, and not because we don't want to scale these, because the minute you start scaling them, it starts looking really weird. So we're using an offset where we can offset the next mesh that's following onto this one if applied to a spline, and bring it back a little bit. But more on that a little bit later. Let's see if we can create a SpeedTree mesh that we can use and apply on a vine. I'm not going to start blank because I don't want to recreate these materials. So what I will do is just quickly do a save as here, and I'll put this in the temp drive. And we'll just call this vine test. And I'll delete the defaults and just start again. I'm going to bring the radius just down to 4 here because I don't need it to be 10. I'm not really sure why it was 10. Just quickly on the materials, they're really nothing special. There's a bark and a leaf material. The bark is just a simple little material that looks like this. I've made it a little bit more green. And then regarding the leaf material, that's a little bit more complex, and this is the one that I don't want to recreate because it takes a lot of time. Last time it took way too much time when we were doing the grass demo. So to get a better look of this, it's actually this guy here. So then we're going to be creating little cutouts. I created little cutouts from these, and I did show how to do that in the previous tutorial. So you just set up your level of detail, your anchors and all of that, and you decide which meshes you want, I extracted or created 3 leaf meshes from this texture here. This texture was also gotten from one of the sources I spoke about last time. It was gotten from one of the sources I spoke about last time. Okay, moving on. Let's start by adding some trunk tubes, and this is the default one that you should be getting. It's obviously way too long, so we'll start by bringing the length down. So we'll go for something like that. Then I'm not crazy about the shape of this. I want it to be a tube and not this cone shape. And that should be the radius. But you'll find there's quite a lot of, it's actually this one here. But there's quite a lot of radiuses all over these properties, and they change with every version of SpeedTree. So you got to kind of mess with one until you find the one that's actually the one you want to change. Now, looking at this kind of tells me that the radius is going to start really big here by the base of the trunk, and it's going to be really thin here at the end. So I want to change this and just flatten that out a little bit so it's a bit more samey. And then I'll to probably about, I think there might be okay. Maybe something like that. Then I just want to see how much, this is currently a square, 40 triangles. I don't think that's a lot, but I'm not crazy about this square shape, so I'm probably going to add a little bit more on the segments. No, and I believe that's a different radius. The radial, rather. I could be wrong, but let's see. So currently it's 3. So I'm expecting this, as I increase this number, the square to become more round. Yeah. And I definitely don't want that many, but I don't want it to be that square. So we'll set it for 5. I think that's okay. And this might be a little bit too thick for a vine. So let's bring it down to 0.75 and give it a little bit of randomness here. And that's terrible. And that's okay, 0.1. I'm just checking something here, because it's never really what you, I think it's pretty much the same as it was before, but anyway. Okay, so now we've got one tube. We can apply the correct material onto it. In the meantime, I'll go for bark and just quickly take a look at this bark material. You probably want to scale that up a little bit. Oh, you have to use the fractional. I just want to play around with these a little bit quickly. So that appears to be moving up and down along the trunk. Well, both of these are, so V is, U is moving along the that plane of the texture space, and then V should be moving up and down. So I don't want to change the offsets, I don't really care about that, but I just want to change the overall scale a little bit, because I'm not crazy about that. And this is still, we'll just leave it at something like that. I think it's still a little bit too thick. And I'm not going to put on caps. I could, but I'm not going to, because I just don't want to. And then it still feels like it's a little bit, feels to me like I'm not changing the correct value for scale, because it looks a little bit too repetitive for me. And you can also twist it maybe a little bit, so that will twist it between the bottom and the base, between the base and the top, or the bottom and the top, so it doesn't look that repetitive, but it still looks a bit awkward, a bit weird. And then there should have been some seam welding, depending on the material that you're using. It should be a repetitive texture, but you're always going to get some kind of seam there. At least this one works fractional by default, so stretch him out a little bit. I think that's okay for now. Let's play a little bit with the, I think it's under segments. Is it shape? Nope, I'm gonna have to go through all of these to find the one thing that I'm looking for. So there's a couple of things I'd want to change. Let's try and play with this late here. It's not the early, the spine noise. So play with this a little bit. Not going to change the amount, so I do want to add some, a little bit of turbulence here. And I also want to add a little bit of twist, but I know that's not the correct twist, so I have to go and look for it. So let's make these, let's add a few more in here. So we've increased our number, and then I don't want them bunched up like this. And I definitely don't want any spacing between them. So I'm just going to set these values to 0.01. And already this would be okay, I guess. I just want to try and add a little bit of twist. Yeah, there we go. This is the guy. So we'll set this to 2, and we'll give this some randomness here. And save. Alright, just looking at this, I'm getting a warning here saying a branch has been removed because the length of the radius is larger than the kill ratio. So somewhere with some of my settings, something got pruned, so it's just warning me. So I could choose to ignore it, or I could look at it. So what I'm going to try is just quickly go to the radial, and I love how the whole UI compacted here. That's really great. So let's see if we can find the cause. I'm wondering if it's not maybe this that's causing it, and it is. Because this radius is so small, the random, this is the little random variance setting is actually becoming 0 or close to 0, and then it just calls out that branch, which is kind of easy to fix if you're a programmer. But so I'm definitely not crazy about the variance I'm getting here. That might be a bit better. So I've just decreased the variance a bit and increased the radius slightly, the radial. Not crazy about this bend here because it's going to look pretty repetitive pretty quickly. So I'm just going to go back and bring this down quite a bit. And let's play with these a little bit. Also got to be careful that they don't see this. I don't want them to pull apart there. So because I'm going to be applying this to a spline, it needs to look like it's one continuous vine. So that's why I'm not using late. We'll skip that. I mean early. I'm not making changes too early. So let's use this. And the next thing I'm going to be applying is some twigs. Initially that's what they'll look like. A nice quick way to make a wizard staff. A Gandalf wizard staff. So that's the default behavior of the twigs. I'm going to say give me about 20 of these guys, and then we're going to play with some dropping the count down to 2. Really liking this, the shape that you get here, but it's not useful for what we're trying to do. And we do want them all the way from the base to the top, to the tip. So I'm setting first and last to 0 and 1. And let's bring down, before I even touch the radial, just need to find the correct length here, and I think it is this guy. That's still too long. Okay. So I'm going to be using an absolute length, and then let's fix the radius quickly. Something like that. So we're getting these thin little twigs, but they're looking all a little bit samey. So I'll see if I can give them a little bit more, yeah, variance, something like that. I think would be okay. And then I also want to give them a little bit of noise. Something like that should be okay. And I might bring them in a little bit more. That should be under length. And I think that's up here. Okay, it's not. It's this guy here. And let's give this a little bit of. That's too much. A little bit of variance. That could be okay. And I'm going to increase the radius just a little bit more. Using an absolute. Something like that. And let's put this on. Yeah, that's definitely not what I wanted. Something like that. This is actually lower than some of the previous ones, I think. So yeah, let's leave it at 20 for now. Let's do this. Just save this quickly and do the leaves. So I'm choosing leaf mesh. And then I'm going to set that to our leaf material. And because I hid my leaves earlier, that's why they weren't showing. Sometimes that happens, and I'm not crazy about the orientation here. And if you apply this to the spline as it is now, it's going to look like this. It's going to look very repetitive, and you'll see this pattern very quickly. That's something you want to try and avoid. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to knock these down, knock the twigs down. Find something that I like, or at least I think I like, and then I'm going to play with these values for these leaves a little bit. I'm going to start by looking at the size. I don't want them to be that large. I'm not crazy about their orientation as well, so I'm going to be messing with the final adjustments here a little bit. first just random values and see what I get. And that's already looking a bit better. And then for fold, we can just twist I'm not crazy about, so I'm going to leave twist. But fold and curl we can do. Doesn't always look great depending on the amount of vertices that you have in your leaf meshes. I would have liked the twigs a little bit more spread out as well, so I'm not sure. Not really sure how I would achieve that without wasting a lot of time. Not crazy about this exact interval. Oh, never mind. Found it. It was set to interval. That's not what I was looking for. So let's pretend I'm happy with this. For vines, I actually prefer the poison ivy type leaf and not these funky leaves here. And then for wind, these already have wind set on them, but what you want to do, you want to make sure that, and then I just want to check the level of detail. I like to normally compute the ambient occlusion, but I like to normally come into the level of detail and just check the size scaler, the growth scale of the leaves. I like bumping that up a little bit. And we've gone from 900 to 300. And also there's some, see this optimization here, this is interesting. I would have expected this to lower the rate. No, never mind. So here we'll bring these down. Length can stay. So now they should lower. So what I'm talking about here is on the higher level of detail where you have lower geometry. I want less radial segments. So now we've got it down to 120 from 280. That's pretty good. And for the twigs, we want the same. And now we're going from 900 to 182, which is going to be viewed from quite a distance. So that's pretty good. Give that a save. And then another nice little trick is, doesn't always work so great, but it is pretty cool. You hit randomize, and then you get some different variants. So we've got our wind applied to our leaves, and they're just rustling slightly. The trunk is moving very, very, very slightly. And I actually don't want the trunk to move. And under animation, it's actually set to not apply it. So I'm going to bring the weight down to the twigs we can leave at 1, but the trunk tube I'm putting the weight down at 0. Seeing if that makes, yeah, that makes the difference. And then I'm going to set it to 0.1. Very, very slightly. Okay, recompute ambient occlusion. This is save. Collision. I do not want collision on my vine splines. I don't want it, but yeah, of course you can add it if you want, but I don't. I'm not for this. I'm going to show you, hopefully depending on the time, the river spline as well, where we actually do use collision. How simple it is, if you do want that. So let's quickly export this. I'm going to put it in the same folder. I'm choosing LODs and billboard, 2K, non-wrapping. All right, that's done. We're going to jump over to Unreal Engine. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop the spline in here. I just want to hide that because it's a little bit in the way. Okay, so I'm just going to create a new folder here, call it Vine Test. And then this is the spline we just exported, Vine 2. You have to take the SpeedTree compiled or exported model, and we'll be dropping it in. I'm going to be excluding collision, not including it. I'm going to ask it to create materials with subsurface, and I do want vertex processing because I want the wind animation. Hopefully it works. Hopefully it works. And let's change a few things. The first thing I want to change is the level of detail. It's usually way too quick. And there are other ways to do this. You can play around with the LOD setup here, but it's set to painted foliage. You could try and mess with this. I generally I prefer to do that on import. Sometimes it breaks unintentionally, breaks other things. So let's quickly take a look at our level of detail before we. So at LOD 0, I was hoping we could see faces, unless I'm blind, but okay, so we've got 932 triangles here on LOD 0. And then on LOD 2 we've got 182, but there's LOD 3, which is our billboard, and that's only got 30 odd, which is great for placing hundreds of these in your level. And then we're also going to be doing culling, but we'll get to that in a second. So the first thing I want to do is I want to just make sure that I can change the screen size. There we go. So if that's grayed out or not ticked, then you need to come in here and untick this auto compute LOD distance. So for LOD 0 it must be 1. Well, it must be greater than the last one. For LOD 1 I like to change this to 0.3. LOD 2 0.1, and then my billboard's going to kick in at 0.05. And that's what the billboard looks like, by the way. You can see they're also doing a nice screen fade effect. Thank you for that, SpeedTree. It wasn't always there. And I'm just saving that. Now for collision, excuse me, you could come in here and you could set your collision to here to complex as simple. But I'm not going to, because like I said, I don't want collision on this. Or you could create your collision objects in SpeedTree and wonder why your trees are colliding very strangely. I found this complex as simple collision looks much better. But there's obviously performance hits involved. So in this tutorial isn't about collision. Okay, so that's our mesh. Now we're swapping on to LOD1 when we're pretty far away, or when it's that size. LOD2 there and LOD3 there. So it's a very nice transition from 3 to 2. It's almost invisible. And then you're going to see a little bit of popping as you go from LOD1 to 0, like we saw earlier. Generally, that's fine. You're going to be seeing LOD popping in every single game you play. Let's drag the vine in here and just see what it looks like compared to the others. I'm going to scale that up just a little bit. Looking at the scale of these guys, this guy's actually pretty small. And yeah, it looks like we will be able to use him. So what I'm going to do is just come in here. let's just come in here and create a new vine spline for this guy. So I'll start, and maybe we should quickly go through the class, the spline actor class. So there's a couple of things that are important here. It contains a reference to a static mesh, which is going to be the thing that you want to place along the spline. It's going to also include things like which axis do you want to use when you're placing it, some override materials, do you want to have collision, what extent offset to use, which will show how that works, and then must the spline contribute to the custom culling. There's a custom culling manager, because unfortunately spline meshes we're going to be that we create here do not get culled using the normal draw distance. They ignore the draw distance setting. I'm not sure if it's a bug, but we had to create our own culling manager just for spline meshes. So what we then do is when this is placed inside the editor, at some point this reconstruct is called. Now this reconstruct will either be called in the blueprint constructor or it will be called in begin play. But it will only be called in begin play if it's a packaged game, because you'll find that your blueprint constructor doesn't always get called in your packaged game, if ever. I don't know if it's a bug, but yeah, it doesn't doesn't happen. Also not sure, maybe if you need to set custom constructor or things like that. I haven't played with it to that extent, but this works. Okay, so then when this reconstruct is going to be called, either from the blueprint constructor or from begin play, if it's a packaged game, we do some validation. We calculate the scale, we calculate the extent of the spline that we say we want to apply to this spline, and then based on the axis that we've used, we use the bounding box, either X, Y, or Z, for this extent. And then we simply calculate how many sections do we have based on the spline length. Now the spline length is retrieved from the spline itself. And we divide that by our extent to how many sections do we need. So we're not scaling the mesh out as we're placing it on the spline. We're placing meshes on the spline using whatever extents we got from the calculate bounds, which is why the offset is so important. And then for each one of these, we simply create spline mesh components. And then the usual attached to component. There's a lot of tutorials out on how to do this. And then you set the static mesh, you set your forward axis. If we do want collision, we're actually setting query and physics, we're setting it to block all, and then we're setting it to world static. So your camera and all that things will also respect that, and your camera won't be going through your geometry. We added this when we were doing the river splines, which I'll show you quickly. And then for override materials, if you want to override the materials, because in our case we do, because in one case we're using a river, and then the other one is the river ground, and we don't need to create meshes for those with different materials. We're just using this. We're simply setting the override materials on the spline mesh component, and then it's just simply figuring out where must the spline mesh be placed along the spline. And that's using this get location and tangent, which I say this is like the standard way of placing splines on placing meshes on a spline mesh component. And then finally we call set start and end using that position and tangent that we calculated. And then we call register all components. This is important. If you don't do this, you'll see it just won't work. And that's it. That's all this guy does. It's very, very simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click here. I'm going to say give me a new blueprint, and I'm not going to choose actor. I'm going to say give me a spline actor. You are going to find there is a Spline Mesh actor that was created by Unreal Engine. It works very similar to this, except you don't have the option to not stretch or scale your Spline Mesh. It stretches and stretches your Spline Mesh, which isn't what I want. And they also don't have the ability to provide it with a little bit of an offset. And where that offset came in, I don't know if you saw that, was in the calculation here where we determine the end. So we can, when we place the mesh, we can determine how much must it scale at the end, basically. And that's quite nice because these vines, they will have a gap in between them, as you'll see now. So we're going to decrease that gap using this extend offset, if it works. If, you know, maybe it doesn't work right now, who knows. So we create our blueprint class from our spline actor. This is the C++ class we were looking at now. And I'm just going to call this vine test blueprint. Currently it's not going to have any mesh set on it, so we'll need to find our little vine test static mesh. There it is. The forward axis is not that difficult to figure out. Look at your extent, approximate size, x, y, z. So z is the longest, the biggest. So I want to extrude or loft or apply this mesh along the z axis. So I'm going to choose z. If you choose X or Y, you're going to get different results. For our river splines, we use X because it's laid flat. It's a flat plate. So for this vine, we definitely don't want to set the forward axis to Z. We want to X. We want to use Z. I'm not going to use any override materials. I'm not going to specify collision. Custom culling for now we can just leave off because I'll show how that works. And then I think that's it. And currently it's not going to show anything in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop this in the level here. I'm going to scale it up. And you can scale these up and down. Like you'll see this guy's scaled up to, they respect their scale, they keep their scale. So that's also pretty cool. And finding them is tricky if you haven't if you haven't attached something to them already. So I'm just going to move this guy out a little bit, see if we start seeing something. I created this blueprint from scratch. I'm not creating a child instance from one of our existing ones. There's a little bit of something manual I have to do. I have to call that reconstruct script here. That reconstruct here if this is running in editor. And that's my fault because I forgot. And there it's working. But now it's going to be very, very small. I just want to switch off the debug flag here, and I want to get rid of this window here. It's always important to give yourself debug flags, and then do some debug logging to the log. So let's just make this a little bit easier to see. And you can see it is scaling up. This might be a little bit scaled up too high. Let's stick with 3 for now, or 4 maybe. And then we're going to see where it looks stretched, but it's actually not stretched at all. It's actually not stretched. There is the second LOD kicking in. So as you can see what I was talking about, let's give these guys a little bit of, maybe it needs to take the extent. It's not scaling the extent as well. I'm multiplying the extent by the actor's scale, either X, Y, or Z. I don't know if that's going to be right. And then I have to do something to trigger it again. It looks like it worked. So that was the problem. But there could still be another problem. So let's see. This is the That was the problem. There are going to be some cases where you just need to move the curve again to force the reconstruct to get called. But here you can see it's not always going to follow the curve perfectly. I think the curve is a little bit too tight there. But yeah, that fixed the issue. So the problem was I didn't take the actor scale into account when I was calculating the extent. I could have done this multiplication somewhere else as well. I did actually make a note of the scale in the log if it's set to debug, but I never use it anywhere. Maybe it was a problem I was trying to solve at some point and then I got distracted by either another problem or something else. Now we can talk about the offset, because that was actually what this whole thing was about. So these gaps here are annoying because they're going to be very visible, especially if you're further away. And then also this curve is very boring. Let's see if I can make it just a little bit more interesting here. I'm just going to hold Alt and just give him a little bit more pizzazz. Something, I don't know what the right word is. Just give him some directionality. That's not a word. Just give him some something other than whatever he is doing now. And I still wouldn't have minded if he's scaled up a bit more. So yeah, I don't even know. This isn't the one even we were working on. I scaled up the wrong one. So the jury is still out on whether or not it really worked. Yeah, cool. All right. So now it's going off into the distance here. I'm getting a little distracted now by playing with these curves. Okay. I need to just adjust this guy as well. We'll also have to do a package build, but okay, back to here. So this is the one that we actually placed in here. Let's move him a little bit here. So this is the one. So you can see there's little gaps here in between these. Lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drop down here to the offset and I'm going to adjust this. Now the problem is the offset itself is not scaling. That could be another issue. But the extent is scaling. So I think maybe the offset mustn't scale. But you can see what I was talking about here. So it's actually stretching. It's stretching the end. If we can find it again, so you can see there it's stretching the end where it would normally meet, where it would be placed on the spline. And now we've got a continuous spline. Now the only trick is, if you do rescale this, you have to fiddle with the spline again. There is a way, obviously, to not have to do that by, if you change the scale, just make sure that the reconstruct is getting called. But then, yeah, I can see the offset is wrong depending on the scale. Scale up the offset as well. And now I run into an immediate problem where I'm relying on uniform scale. So X could be 1, Y, X, Y, and Z must be the same value for scale, otherwise this won't work. I think that's correct. Let's see if we can see where does one start and where does the other one end. Yeah, I think that's fine. So if I bring the scale back to 1 and then just adjust one of these quickly, it should still be correct. Now I need to find, there it is. Yeah, looks right. Cool. So then we did a little debugging as well. Let's put the scale back at 4 and just adjust the curve slightly. And then take a look at our vine again. Right, so that was the one part of what I wanted to show. And we did a little bit of debugging as well and found an issue, which is great. So let's quickly take a look at the culling. Now, the offset for this guy is a little bit wrong, because I can still see gaps there, so I want them to overlap slightly. Oh. I think 50 was good. Yeah, that's fine. All right, so we've got our vine following the spline, and we can make adjustments to our curves, and the vine will go along. And it's not stretching, it is following the rules that we gave it. There's obviously a little bit of stretching because I'm specifying that offset. And then yes, the texture here, the bark texture is a little bit stretched, but that's because that's how I did it in SpeedTree. But you'll see the leaves, and you'll see if you use the normal spline actor, the minute you apply this kind of mesh on it, the leaves are going to stretch, and it's going to look very, very strange. It's not going to look like a vine of any kind. Here you can also see a little gap there with the twigs. So okay, so when I was talking about the culling, you can set the max draw distance of your spline mesh component. I may have discovered something. So this is off. Yeah, so it's totally ignoring it. You can see that this is way further than 15,000. Oh, but wait, we need to call it again. Make sure that the construction script is getting called again. Yes. Oh, there we go. Yay! All right, scratch that. All right, so not sure why I didn't think of that before. Okay, cool. Another bug fixed. No reason for this guy anymore. So there you go. To handle the culling, you need to set LD max draw distance on your static mesh component. It's not using the max draw distance from the spline. It's ignoring that. That doesn't matter at all. I know that doesn't work, but I'm going to set it anyway. And normally I would expose a property for that and just make that property editable. But just in case the spline does have something that needs to be clean, so that makes life a lot easier. Okay. That means these guys will also, yeah, nice. But for them, yeah, for the river, I would rather want to set them much higher. That's why I say that needs to become a property. So I'll set that to a property. But I just quickly want to show what we did with the river spline. It's nothing revolutionary. It's exactly the same stuff we've been talking about now. There's just a little plane mesh here with a material applied to it. Any material you want. Now looking at the mesh itself, this one, if you look at the approximate size, X is the biggest, so we're extruding this along X, which is why the forward axis is set to X. And then when you drop this guy in the level, and then you can start manipulating him to create rivers. And then you can change the materials here in your override materials, if you can find it. We use two, one for high and one for low, so it'll just set based on index. So this will go to material 0, this will go to material 1. And what I mean by that is on these meshes here, I know material 0 is high and material 1 is low, used for lower LOD, like LOD from LOD 2, you can see, and you can even see it here. You can see there's LOD 2, and there. Let's quickly set this to something else. So now it's not a river anymore, it's a piece of road, or a, well, not really a road. I wouldn't use this for a road. For roads like we have here, I would just use the normal landscape spline, the landscape spline component or tool. They also have the ability to place meshes along the landscape, but these aren't necessarily for the landscape. And what I mean by that is, if we just quickly, I've demoed this before, so I'm not going to go through it in great detail. But if I do, I'm just running some spawners here. And then I know there's a couple of tags I need to add. Vine and grass. And then let's drape this quickly with vines. If it doesn't crash. So let's check if the level of detail, no, it's working. Can see them disappearing. The culling, sorry. Yeah, there they're gone. So what we've done here is we found meshes in the world based on some values, some tags, and then we're procedurally draping some vines across them using just a simple little algorithm. I've already gone through the procedural mesh generators and how they work, so I'm not going to go through it again. And then let's just put some grass on it as well. This takes a little bit longer. All right, it's done. And now they have grass as well. that is created using instanced spawning. Now I've covered this before, but there you can see, so there's the vines getting draped there and the grass as well. I'm actually really glad I found that problem with the vine draper culling. I'll need to go and update the answer on Answer Hub on Unreal Engine forum, because nobody's answered that question. Then the last part of the puzzle, we'll do a quick build. Package game. Alright, the package is done. Let's give it a quick. So yeah, modified 1 minute ago. This is it. It's going to load us up into a different level. So let's just travel to the test level, and there we go. There are the spline components there. See if we can find one. Yeah, there we go. So the level of detail is working there as well. The culling level of detail is not what I meant. Culling. Is this thing on? Yeah. And that is going to wrap things up for this video. So I'm going to see if I can get a nicer spot. Yeah, something like that. Cool, 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 cool. Thanks for watching.